Welcome to the SaaS developer community, the channel where we share our SaaS stories and we learn from each other. And this week I have as a guest Norwood, was the cloud architect designing control plane for first Confluent platform and then Confluent Cloud. And now he's working with us on our SaaS platform at Nile. His backstory here is that a few weeks ago, we were talking about how we may want to do cluster provisioning using our platform and how it could work. And while designing it, Norwood showed me a pretty cool design, but he also showed me the tool that we can use to collaborate on designs. And I was so excited about it that now we're doing everything with that tool. And that's Excalidraw. And I thought we will share with everyone how it works. So I invited Dan Norwood, software architect, to join us and show us how to collaborate on system design.
Awesome. Thanks, Gwen. Yeah, so Excalidraw is pretty much a whiteboard, like a canvas, just to do whatever you want on it. And we've been using some other tools to sort of do sequence diagramming and state management, a bunch of different drawing tools, basically. But sometimes you also just want to be able to draw whatever you want. And Excalidraw makes that super easy. So the example that Gwen brought up was we wanted to basically show a sequence diagram for how a cluster provisioning could happen on a new system. And so Excalidraw made that super easy to draw something that's a little bit more engaging than your standard sequence diagram. So the cool thing is there's, well, first of all, there's a bunch of shapes you can draw. You're just trying to like diagram simple boxes and connect them together, show how they interact and how that, like as a sequence diagram, this might be some things like that. But there's a little bit more fun you can have if you want. So there's libraries that you can add on to your Excalidraw to have like different database types, all that sort of stuff. So like if you want to have if you're using a bunch of AWS stuff, you can have that. I already have some added for myself. So I always like to start with like a person who's going to instigate all the problems in our system. And then what I would do is sort of right here in the middle, we'd have, here's the state that we want them to be updating. So this is going to look something like this. Let's say that we have an ID on our object and we have a name for it, and we have a state that we want it to be in, right? And so we'll say that this user wants to basically create something on it. And say this is like a post on / widgets with some data, right? We'll just say whatever that is. You might define for yourself. And then we come in here and we'll say, oh, we'll say this state is going to start out in creating. So what we're saying here is we have a user, right? And they're interacting with our system. So they tell us, hey, post, we want to create a widget. We know that this widget is going to be in the creating state, right? So this is a state in our database. And then next we want to say, hey, after this create happened, we want to sort of notify this other system that when we know that we want to create a new object, we need to notify our external system that we need to do an actual provision. So we want to hit an external system to do that. And this might be something that we already have, a customer already has in existence. Right, so we should label these things, right? So this is our state. This over here is a customer system. Right, so what we have here is user posts something, it sets our state, and then we basically want to have a handler here that goes out and posts to external system. All right. And then this system, systems internals are probably like a little like, you know, loopy and crazy. And like, who the heck knows what's going on out there. But you want to be able to show that like, oh, there's a bunch of stuff going on over here. And that then when this system finishes what it's doing, we want to have this, have like an exit point that comes back to our system. That will say that that our widget is now in the active state. Right. And so this is how we sort of go through and say, show a little graphically, and you can be a little bit more, you know, precise in some of these things, like what's actually in the post and what's actually going on in here. You can embed other images in here, right? So there's a lot of widgets that you can put in here to say like, oh, there's actually a database here. And then I can see like, oh, like I put this together, and Gwen wants to know like, is this actually going to be Postgres, right? So we can go get,
so that's the other thing, right? This page is kind of collaborative. So while he's kind of drawing and thinking about things, I have questions, I don't need to interrupt him. I can put like stickies, what's going to be here, or I can propose, hey, over there's going to be maybe a queue. And so we can really kind of play around on the same system, each one of us on their own machine, which is something that we kind of struggled finding a lot of other tools that allowed us to work on the same space at the same time without stepping on each other's toes. So I really appreciate this part. So, and then once he answered my question, is it going to be in Postgres?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so yeah, we can kind of get rid of the sticky notes. And
yeah, and like the library of things is very nice to have, just because it gets a little bit daunting when these graphs get larger and larger to just see boxes and just like text labels on boxes. It's really ugly.
Yeah, but the really nice thing is like, it just, the style is very consistent and it looks good, which is like, it shouldn't matter, right? Like if it was a whiteboard, it wouldn't have looked good. But the fact that it kind of looks both friendly, like, I don't know, the hand-drawn lines, but still pleasing together and not very random. I don't know, for me, it definitely makes things more compelling.
Yeah, it feels like even though we're totally remote, it feels like we're sort of drawing on a board together. It makes it actually.
And it's way better than, like, it's what I wish my handwriting would look like on the whiteboard.
Yeah.
I always feel like, you know how engineering interviews, like the coding interview, kind of transition from write a bunch of stuff on a whiteboard, which is never pleasant, but there is a large degree of leniency because people expect that writing on a whiteboard is incredibly hard. And now most of the interviews are like this kind of shared CoderPad editor. And because it has like actual ability to run tests and it has like code complete, actually the level of expectations went way higher on how good the code for a coding interview should be. I'm also thinking like if we could have this kind of thing, just because it looks like handwriting, nobody would expect it to be a very high quality code. Maybe that's kind of how the modern code interview should be.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I can totally see this as like a system design question. Like how high of a rate of reads would this thing support?
Right.
How would you scale it? Where would you put load balancers?
Right. Absolutely. And then like it's easy to say like where you want to have things come off, right? Like in this example, we have like handlers that are posting out to this. And so like as we're going on, it's like, oh, we can have like, oh, our user out here needs to get a notification, right? So like, what's the next thing that happens, right? It's really easy to just keep building onto this same thing and say like, oh, after this, we want this next thing to happen. And you can keep going down and down through this. So it is sort of like, if you've ever experienced a designer going through Figma, it's just like chain after chain of like how all they end up with this their whole mental model mapped out on one big board, and this sort of gives us a you know, as like system design a similar capability.
exactly that. And it actually lets us kind of invent almost our own design language while we're using it. Because like we had other tools that didn't have all those bits, nice built-in library. And then if everything is a square, it doesn't work as good as a visual, because you have to actually read everything. And if you have to read anything, you may as well have a document and call it a day.
Right.
Here, half the stuff is immediate at like first glance. And I'm sure we can make it even more if we just found the right library widgets for everything. Like, I don't know if there's a library widget for big blob of provision your own things, but
Yeah.
honestly, this blob describes exactly what most Terraform looks like. So I think we got it perfect.
Yeah, I think so too.
I'm trying to think what else is cool here that I'll want to share. Oh, maybe the font families, because I kind of love that I can go and actually make it look more like code if I want to.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to look like handwriting. I kind of enjoyed that part.
Yeah, you can make it look as
Here,
like,
that's the thing I wanted. Yes.
There's like a really greatly named thing of like how sloppy you want your drawings to be, so you can sort of turn it up and down depending on your audience too.
I can do max sloppiness, or actually it's still quite sloppy. Oh, and then the fill can also, it can be like this, or you can make it a crosshatch, or you can actually make it solid. And somehow the solid still looks just sloppy enough to be correct, which I absolutely love. Like, this is what it would look like if I tried to paint it solid. That's something if I want it in red. The sloppiness is good. I think you once showed me that you can actually animate stuff, or am I mixing up tools?
You can. There's a it's a little bit complicated to actually do. So you have to Excalidraw, animate. So basically what you end up doing is so let's say that you have this and you wanted to make it animated. You will export this one. It's going to save it to a file. Yeah, so it'll automatically just go through and animate your whole thing. The tricky piece here is you need to.
Oh, so you need to draw it in the right order in the first place in order for it to actually work.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, the stuff that it remembers the order for and the stuff it doesn't. Because it remembered my widget, like the pipeline, as red, even though I swapped it into red later.
Yeah.
When I created it was green.
Yeah.
So,
so I mean, the one really nice thing on Excalidraw is all these images can be exported as SVGs or PNGs. And so the way that Excalidraw animate here actually works is it takes the SVG and the order that the SVG is laid out. So all the like colors and everything are just CSS that are applied to the SVG.
Oh, and it assumes that the SVG, when you export the SVG, it actually exports in the right order that you did things, which is absolutely not a given. I don't know if.
So for a couple of things that I've used this animation tool for, I'll just go in the SVG and you can like manually reorder the elements, and then it'll get things to show up in the right way that you want, which is sort of, it's a little bit of a pain because you got to be manually editing in XML, which is not something anybody likes doing, but yeah. The other cool thing is
now I like, how readable is this SVG? Because it can be.
I mean, so the most I've ever done manually is just going in and reordering elements, right? So you just have, it's just a block with a bunch of elements inside of it. So there's no super complicated nesting.
No, so I get that the box will be a single element, but like the text stuff, yeah, I don't know how it gets translated to vectors, I guess, or like the little widgets that I dropped in, is it like a single element? Or
they're I'm pretty sure they are from what I remember. But yeah,
it is a language I've never learned, so.
Yeah, it's super powerful. You can actually animate through the SVG too. So you can export from this animation tool to like either WebM files or animated SVG itself. So you can then take this and embed it in you know, whatever you want, either like your internal docs, or if you're doing this for external users, you could use it.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I found it useful for was, so I am a PM, and most PMs are supposed to draw wireframes of what the application should look like. I was actually never very good at that. Like, I could do the stuff, but most PMs could do really nice mocks, and I always felt like one day I should learn how to do this. So this is another thing that actually becomes way easier when you have a really nicely drawn but just sloppy enough library of components to draw on. So one of the things that we have in the library is, I think forms was super useful, and that allowed me to do things like, okay, I have this box, actually it's an empty box, and then it will have this kind of bar. Sorry, did not quite work. It has a bar on top, and this is a fairly, like, it should be a button, but fairly easy to repurpose it, as I actually have tabs. Like, and then maybe I have this input field somewhere, and all those things kind of look professional, and it takes literally zero effort. I pick stuff up out of a library, I drop it somewhere, and I probably need to type something like, this is for the UI, so obviously code is not appropriate, but something like that. And I can actually kind of design what the system would look like. And the combination of very flexible boxes means that if I want to tell Norwood that, hey, here I want a bar chart diagram, I can just go and bar chart a bunch of stuff. And again, it looks fairly sloppy, but good enough for him to understand that, hey, Gwen wanted a bar chart here, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it does a really good job of getting the point across while also making it clear that it's not pixel perfect, right? Like the intent is not pixel perfection here.
Yeah, and the fact that it reduces the stress from me, like, because I know no matter what I do, it will be about that sloppy. It just kind of unblocks a mental block of my designs are not good, which is apparently all that had to happen, which is kind of amazing. Yeah, one thing I don't actually know, suppose that I really hate what you did here, and I actually think that it's not really a name, it should be cluster, and it should have VPC, ID, and public, etc. And then, is there a public history? Like, can a third party go back and see, oh, Gwen went and edited everything that Norwood did?
I don't believe so. I'm not actually sure about that. I mean, there's a history here because, so I delete this.
So let's say that you copy something and now I try to do undo.
Oh yeah, actually, yeah, here I'll change something. I'll say inside of here, here I'll just, my OCD will get me to...
How dare you ident my stuff? Yeah, I cannot undo it, man.
Yeah.
That's a problem. I guess it's now indented forever.
Yeah.
We'll have to live with it.
Well, I actually like this feature then.
I mean, it depends. If I go in and break your stuff, then
Right.
you won't like it anymore. Yeah, so you do need to be careful. If I want to save a specific state, like, I'm super happy with it, and I'm actually really worried that Norwood will come in before tomorrow's morning meeting and will change all the entire proposal. You showed that you can save it, right? So there is like...
Yes, you can export them either to link or to disk. And then Excalidraw Plus, you can pay for like them to manage and hold it all. And then if you save them locally, you can import them from here too.
Yeah. And by the way, it may make sense to say that we actually, because we use it so much and we now have quite a few designs at various phases of agreement, we did elect to, and I think Norwood kind of just said, darn it, I will pay for that. And we ended up with a shared workspace. And it is quite useful. Like you can do your own stuff. You have like your own private space. And you can kind of drag and drop things into public folders. So that was pretty cool, I thought. And yeah, now we have a fairly big library of designs that may or may not ever make it into a product, but were definitely fun to, they helped us resolve misunderstandings about what a product would be like, because those kind of things of user does this and then this happens, they're really, really hard to explain in any other way. Like when we tried documents and we tried more formal diagrams and we tried formal sequences, and it was just never, somehow, like the sequence diagrams were really, really too hard to read and too detailed, and somehow this lets you just get the correct level of fidelity, I think.
Like they're really good when you do need like that like RFC level perfection.
Yeah.
But when you are just trying to be a little bit sloppy, this lets you sort of, you know, feel good about your sloppiness.
It's that, but I think in terms of communicativeness, like the moment you draw this big sequence diagram, it's hard not just to write, it's hard to read. And like, okay, you will need to read it if you want to actually implement the system, but if you just try to get a point across to another human being, it's actually harder to understand the point at this level of detail. Essentially, not just that it's too early to even attempt to break down thoughts into that level of detail.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you feel like you get better feedback with this? Because that's another thing that's kind of important, right? If people start nitpicking something that's not ready, it's a bit,
I think
not great.
I think I get better feedback because at least like as I'm hearing somebody's concerns with something, it's pretty easy for me to go in and say, well, okay, like if you don't want this to happen here, then like what do you want to happen, right? Like, or like what should be the actual data that gets passed here, or like when you added this and said maybe we want to add queuing here, it's like, okay, well, I can put this here. Now we all know that it's queuing and it's not a synchronous call, right? So like I think it's very easy to very quickly make these modifications that in any other thing other than like actually being at a whiteboard is very difficult to get up and do. Right. So
exactly
like on a sequence diagram, it's like, oh,
yeah, I could actually do like, you know, copy this thing. You actually see that I copy it. You don't see that I'm copying it. And I can do like, okay, when things that we don't need public, like this, we'll just have default to something. That's way too much information, but we do need also subnet. That's kind of important. And then if we are on a public subnet, we'll just be public. That's absolutely more usable. What do you think?
Right. Yeah. And or like I mean, a thing might be like, oh, when I put this together, I said, oh, we're going to do email, right? And then in the conversation, it becomes apparent. Everybody thinks, well, everything has to be email. And then it's very easy to be like, oh, we can also just say Slack, right? So it's very easy to just say, oh, there's like multiple ways to do this, right? Like and live, you can get,
That's a bit too big.
or you can like automatically tweet somebody that their clusters are ready, right? So like the point is though, like as somebody's giving their concerns, you can very quickly make these changes and feedback so that they can see their changes applied to your system, and you guys can make sure like the mental model is the same.
Okay. I think we're out of silly Excalidraw ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A bit.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dan. It was more fun than I normally have on those videos, to be honest. Now I feel like every interview should actually have an Excalidraw where people can actually demonstrate their ideas. Like I'm just thinking back for last week when Ram tried to explain a complex system architecture, and then while editing the video, I actually went to Excalidraw and started drawing things out, and then took a screenshot and put it in the video so the listeners would have any idea what is actually going on. I feel like this should actually be mandatory from now on.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you have somebody saying this and then it touches this, it's like you're already losing people when you're doing that.
Only there were like real life tooltips that something would pop up and say, you really want to be using Excalidraw here.
Exactly.
In the metaverse, this is how interviews will work. Excalidraw will show up if you start waving your hands too much in an interview. Okay. Thank you so much, Dan. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, same.